Our next speaker is Marian Mesrobian MacCurdy. She's a writer, teacher, and a singer. She is a retired professor and chair of the Department of Writing at Ithaca College and is currently visiting professor in the Medical Humanities program at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She has published scholarly articles as well as personal essays and poetry, and her work has been used in Columbia University's narrative medicine program. Her most recent book, Sacred Justice, The Voices and Legacy of the Armenian Operation Nemesis, was published earlier this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Marian Mesrobian MacCurdy.
What I want to talk about is in some ways a result of what happened from Near East Relief's change in its organizational patterns. So Near East Relief was a miracle. And it was a miracle because it saved millions of lives, children's lives. They funded money for orphans. They brought people over. They did amazing things for the Armenians and for others in that part of the world. The problem was that after the war, nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to know anything about what happened to the Armenians. So someone asked a question about the relationship between what happened to the Republic of Armenia in 1919 and this material. The problem was that the mandate for Armenia that the Armenians had hoped for did not materialize. Woodrow Wilson presented it, but he presented it too late to the Senate, and they decided not to vote for that. And so the country that was Armenia at that time got swallowed up by the Soviet Union. And of course, that led to all kinds of other problems as well. And one of those problems was the denial that the Turks were able to create that the genocide ever existed at all. And so that's what I want to talk about today. As I'm sure you all know, the Turkish leaders that created the genocide had disappeared. They were able to run away. They got on some of them got on a night boat, a torpedo boat, a German boat, in 1919 on November 1, the evening of November 1-2, and they disappeared, took all their money with them. They were continuing their plots to kill Armenians, which made it imperative that something should happen to prevent them from carrying out further missions against the Armenians. These were men who had been convicted in the Turkish tribunals, post-war tribunals, of capital crimes. They were never extradited back to Turkey to face their punishment. A few Turks had been punished. Most of them were sent off to Malta by the British. It was kind of like Club Med there at the time. And within a year, they were set free to come back again to Turkey, and most of them joined public life and became part of Ataturk's administration. So, what happened? Well, how do you get justice in a case like that? You have to do it yourself, and this is what the Armenians did. They were asked by the British to put together a list of perpetrators of the genocide, and they did this. They handed the list to the British, and the British did nothing with these lists, so they used them themselves. 25 years after my grandfather died, 25 years after my grandfather died, we discovered a cache of letters in a small bedroom upstairs on the second floor. It was my childhood bedroom, actually, where I slept as a little kid. I lived with my grandparents for many years until we were able to have our own home. And even when we got our own home, it was like a half a mile up the street. So I knew these people very well. I thought I did. We opened this cache of letters, and we discovered in these letters that my grandfather was the funding officer, the finance officer, and in charge of logistics for Operation Nemesis. We found approximately 40 letters written by and from these people who were involved. Armen Garo, Shah Natali, my grandfather, Hamo Paragamyan, Zala Nalbandian, people like that. In this tiny room, we found these boxes. My mother took the boxes to her house, and she went through them. She summarized what was in the letters, and she put them in a file and put them in her basement, her wet basement. 2 floods later, and after my mother died, I took these boxes out of there. And I found this so incredibly surprising that she would go through the effort of summarizing these letters, categorizing them, so that I would know what I was looking at, because otherwise it's just you don't know what you're looking at. It's just handwritten letters. So she did all of that, and yet they were on the wet basement floor. And I think, looking back on it, that this was a man whose most violent act in my life was to pinch my arm when I was a little kid if I did something bad. That's what I was supposed to do. So this was someone who was extremely quiet. He basically never raised his voice. And so here we were scratching our heads. How does it happen? This is the guy who's the finance officer. He raised the money for Operation Nemesis. He organized these hunts for these men. How did this happen? I took the letters out, one by one, with the help of my cousin, Arsenet Oshagan. I think you all probably know Haik Oshagan. That's your son-in-law, by marriage. We took these letters out, and some of them were wet, some of them were dry, all crackled. Put them on the table in the kitchen. And our eyes got bigger and bigger as we realized what we were looking at. The voices of the men of Nemesis entered my consciousness. And I realized that my grandfather was this leader of this band of avengers. Now, I'm against capital punishment. So here I am looking at these, and I realized my mother's difficulty. She must have seen these as kind of radioactive, because why else would they be in the basement? And yet, you see, you can't help but feel pride. All my life, I, along with every other woman I've ever known, burned for justice. And here my grandfather had helped provide the only justice the Armenians have yet had. So, what I thought I would do is, I'm going to talk also about the second half of the book, and then I'm going to read just a little bit from the book. As I read these letters, something else happened to me as well. All four of my grandparents were survivors. As I listened to the stories in these Nemesis letters, and it says, written by my grandparents, I realized something about my family that I'd never understood before. One side were resistors, my mother's side. The other side had been victimized by the Turks. And their reactions to the way that they coped in the world were totally dramatically opposite. And I spoke with other Armenians, and I found the same kind of thing to be true. My mother's parents resisted the siege of Dershol, and they grew tougher and harder. Well, my father's family could only run, and we did. Turkish mobs were coming into Kharpert, and my grandfather ran into the woods. My grandmother ran to the American mission. They were separated for over 10 years. My father's mother echoed this high-pitched yells, like, from the Turks with their swords and scimitars as they charged through the Armenian community of Kharpert. Elizabeth, my grandmother, she was the one here in Detroit. Died before I was born, but I can still hear those screams my father relayed to me. And that bespeaks the level of power that came through these stories. But these bifurcated views I don't think are unusual. I suspect that other families have the same kind of reality. So my mother's family were tough-minded, clear-headed, disciplined, confident. They were not emotionally very expressive. I remember I asked my mother once, I said, did your parents ever say, I love you? Because when I said, I love you, Mom, my mother would say, thank you, dear. That's kind of odd. Where did that come from? And she said, no, they never did, but I knew they loved me, and I have no doubt that was true. This gives you an example of what I mean by tough-headed. So when my parents' cat died, they buried it on our property, and my mother was kind of teary-eyed, and my grandmother said, why are you crying? A cat's only a cat. And I suspect after burying an infant daughter, as she did, a cat is only a cat. On the other side, existential fear was nearly a daily constant presence. When I wanted to do something as a kid that required my father's permission, I always knew he was going to say no first. So I used hyperbole. But Dad, I have to do this, I have to do this. And my father would say, there are only two things in life you have to do. Die and pay your taxes. So I'm looking at these two sides of my family as I'm reading through these letters of these unbelievably heroic acts that these people did, and the hard edge they had to take in life to do it. And so that became the second half of this book. So what happens when you resist? And what happens when you don't? And what sorts of legacies does that leave families? So I'm going to read a little bit from the opening of the book. It starts with two epigrams. The flock moved on, majestic and wise, that it might persist forever. From Komitas, the Shepherd Songs. Sude, Amen Pam, Sude. It's a lie. It's a lie. Everything is a lie. From the Armenian dance song. I was born at the intersection of East and West, life and death, hope and despair. My grandparents' job is to survive, my parents to aim us all into another universe, and my generation's job to remember. We all did our tasks imperfectly. Parts of us survived, even thrived. Parts did not. Much of us is anchored to our adopted home. Other parts are floating, bodiless, without tether in the ether between Turkish Armenian and America, between the will to thrive and the guilt for doing so, of never being able to do enough to fix what cannot be fixed. There is no completion to these tasks. We are still attempting to survive, to anchor, and to remember. For the first 6 years of my life, my parents, my brother, and I lived in our maternal grandparents' house in Syracuse, New York. We were, all 6 of us, crammed into a small, early 20th century frame house with a front porch and tiny back study that served as my bedroom, with an enticingly flat roof outside its window that looked onto our great arbor, fruit trees, and beyond that looked overlooking Emerald Park. I, the youngest of 5 grandchildren, was my grandfather's favorite, or so Eliza, my grandmother, had told me. And in Armenian, my grandfather spent most of his days in the grandmother chair near the boom radio he listened to every day, soundly smoking his camels with shaking fingers, perhaps from undiagnosed Parkinson's that would years later steal my mother's smile and cause her shuffling gait. But when I was 3, 4, 5, my bed's hiding, bounced me on his foreleg, carried me through the doorways on his shoulders like a coronated queen, and took me outside at dusk to survey the peach, pear, and apple orchards and the grape arbor beyond our back door. This quiet man who wore a 3-piece suit nearly every day of his life would have private sessions with countless visiting friends, dignitaries, and battle heroes such as General Dro, and said to his wife about baby Marian, "This one's special, but the main thing special about me was his love for me." The United Nations Human Rights Subcommission report in 1985 recognized the Armenian deaths of 1915 to 18 as genocide. However, given the strategic importance of Turkey to American interests, our government is still enthralled with the Turkish government and its acolytes to deny the truth of their actions. This leaves the Armenian community in a bizarre psychological limbo. The country that took in many Armenian genocide survivors does not want to fully recognize the reason they are here. In addition, since the Turks have not yet acknowledged their crimes as the Germans did, full justice is not possible for the Armenians, leaving the actions of the IRF open to interpretations of retribution, even terrorism, further dividing a divided people. I want to say one thing about this, about terminology, before I go any further. The Armenians in 1919, when they decided that they were going to move against the Turks in the way that they did, called this operation terrorism. They called it terrorism because the whole idea was, they knew it would make people afraid. But the word then does not mean the way that word is used today. Contemporary terrorism is not this. Contemporary definitions refer to killing innocent people to call attention to some known or unknown, real or perceived injustice. The point is to kill anybody. They're not the guilty people. What the Armenians did was go after the people that had been accused and convicted of these crimes and never brought back to face punishment. So I want to be really clear about that word. While I can fully understand the need for justice, even retribution, I still find it difficult to imagine my gentle grandfather, this man who never raised his voice, taking on this work. Resistors needed an immense level of focus and control to proceed, and that has had implications for the rest of the family. I'm going to give you an example of what Aaron was about in these days. So he spent days and nights, even after the first child was born in 1912, working at the Heidenik. He was then the manager of the Heidenik. Undoubtedly, they were working on political matters at that time because he had been a part of the ARF ever since before he went back to Turkey. My grandmother was left at home in a country where she didn't know the language, he knew very few people. And he didn't tell her when he was coming home. And of course, they didn't have the kind of communication that we have today that make it easy for him to say, "I'll be home in a couple of days," So one day, my grandmother became worried. Her husband didn't return home for 2 days. She bundled her infant daughter up against the winter cold, and after taking several trolleys and trains in the strange city of Boston, arrived at her husband's workplace, only to be scolded and told by him to leave, and quickly. And she wrote in her memoir, "Son, this is marriage. With my hands and feet frozen and in tears, I reached home," quote unquote. My grandmother Eliza loaded guns during the siege of Georgia. She left her homeland at 17. She had 4 children before she was 30. She ran her household virtually on her own because her husband was often out of town on either his accounting business or dealing with Armenian political affairs. Her 4th child died in infancy. She seldom spoke of this, only saying once when I asked her about it that the child died of pneumonia because the doctor didn't keep the baby covered during the exam. 3 children are enough, she said. She taught in the Armenian community center. She helped raise her grandchildren. She did what she had to do. One summer, she had what she termed a nervous breakdown. Even the sound of the newspaper pages being turned could not be tolerated. Her husband sent her on a vacation to the Connecticut shore with all 3 children. As an example of her toughness, so when I had a baby, I got toxemia and I was pretty sick, and they did a cesarean section. Didn't happen with the second year, but for whatever reason, happened with the first. I came home about 5 days later with this new baby, and my grandma looks down at me and she says, "So, when do you get another?" Now, Aaron was the same way. The story told about his self-control. A former staff member told this story to my grandmother. So, this man was getting very heated, the man that told the story. He was very heated in air, and he got very heated. So much so that he was sent out of the room, and Aaron's standing outside. And the man comes and he looks at Aaron. Aaron doesn't say a word. He just stands there. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Finally, 10 minutes go by. Aaron says, "All right, now we can go back in." So that's how he solved problems. I never met my father's parents, but my parents spoke of them. When my mother's father had first come to the United States at 16 looking for a better life than their precious Turks would allow, my father's family escaped to the United States to preserve theirs. Their lives were defined by the loss of their home and country. They spoke of the old country as where they belonged. The peaches were sweeter, the sun was brighter. They lived in fear of the streets of Detroit, the strangeness of the country they were forced to adopt, not to mention the trauma they carried from the massacres. My father was a sweet soul who hated cruelty of any kind. He was proud of me when at the age of 8 I argued with my uncle that hunting was unfair since the animals cannot carry guns. But for him, most Ovars had to prove they could be trusted before he welcomed them into his world. But then for children of genocide survivors, perhaps nothing in life is to be trusted. When I was old enough to drive and asked you to sit down in the car, my father's perennial response was, "What, do you have to go out?" "Again, I don't have to go out. I want to go out." "Well, if you go out, something bad can happen to you. If you stay home, nothing bad will." So that is the end of the introduction. What I thought I would do now is just read just a little small bit of the letters. Concern primarily the assassination of Talat Pasha. And what they show is how they did it. And here's an example of this. This is a letter sent from Geneva, October 4, 1920, and it's sent to Aaron, and it's signed Shahan. Shahan and my grandfather were very close. Shahan signed this with kisses, Shahan. They're emotional in their letters. They just weren't, impersonal. I don't know. So this is to him. Dear Sachakman, several days ago I wrote you a letter. Hope that it reached you safe. Before leaving for Berlin, here is yet a second letter where I will work to give you in a concise manner the conclusions I've reached as a result of my research. You know that research was, of course, it was hunting down Talat, because by then he moved to Berlin, or was in the process of moving to Berlin. In order to get daily news here, establishing a bureau is necessary. In other words, to have someone. I have that someone. That person, God knows, has at his disposal an undercover policeman who proposed to us to inform us day and night about Turks entering Switzerland. His promise to do that, and as compensation, he is required with 300 Swiss francs monthly for him and 100 francs also at the German border for the official who does passports and visas, so that he immediately gives word to him and he to us. The extra is outside of that. I said to myself that instead of that way, we give him a list and let him give us news from that list about the entry of any one of them, in the event of verification that we pay him even more. We will see what the response will be. Let me say immediately that undercover policeman has been told that the people on that list are wanted by the Allies and we want to help them. This is the unavoidable approach that I have to resort to in this rotten world. Let me see what I will do in Berlin. Well, we know what he did in Berlin. And what he's referring to by this rotten world is that they thought that the British were actually going to bring in these men and punish them. And so those lists were for the British. So this is evidence that they were indeed using them themselves. Now, Shahan was a very emotional man. He was an actor in both ways of what we can define that word. He studied acting, and he also was the person that got stuff done. But it didn't happen easily, and he had all kinds of frustrations in doing this work. And here's an example of that in the same letter. I don't say anything here. I'm silent as a rock. and I wait for the day when I have to speak, when it is necessary to call many people. I'm silent now, because I must remain silent and be focused on a big purpose. Here in this place, except for one person who's connected to the work, all the others think that I've come for the purpose of healing my heart disease. I write these things to you so that you take note that you sent me what I've written in my previous letter, and one day when I die, you speak in my place. If this be my final letter, always remember me. Now, point of fact, Sean lived to 99. But he didn't know. He could have been killed at any point. I'll just read just a teeny bit more. So, this is a letter to the North Central Committee of America in Boston, and it was written by Marian Mesrobian, who was I kind of think he was the soul of Nemesis. My grandfather was the brain, and Sean was the heart. That's the way I think about these three guys. So this is a letter that he sent. It was sent from Paris on March 17, 1921. On March 17, it's 2 days after Talat Pasha had been killed. But it's a month after the rebellion, the February rebellion in Armenia, where the Armenians rebelled against the communists that had come in and that ultimately took over the country. They rebelled and they held it back, taken it back for about 3 weeks, and then they lost it. And so he refers to the calamity that was happening in Armenia. During these heavy days when our people again are convulsing in the claws of death, and when the leaders are occupied solely with their personal glory and their petty agendas, Sean's success is the only consoling event. Apply every means that are proof that this was an individual act. It is not the time for party advertising. The situation in our country is very delicate. Looking at the latest news, our leaders have been forced to work together with the Turks against the Bolsheviks in the war that they are waging. Consequently, it is not at all the time to let this undertaking be ascribed to our party. It's important to know that the country of Armenia at that time had nothing to do with Nemesis. There was some talk that people thought maybe it did, but it did not. I think I'm probably out of time. Am I? Yeah. All right. I can't read you the best letter of all. Would you come tonight? Oh. Well, thank you so much.